Greetings, I'm Nate, the Masculinity and Mindset Coach. Today I'm going to be answering a question that is posed in our Sovereign Brotherhood Community. And this question is as follows. Are you tapped into your primal nature? Do you have the ability to protect your loved ones if you had to? What ways are you improving your connection with your primal nature? Are you able to express this nature in a way that is subtle? How has society affected your natural primal nature positively and negatively? And what ways do you consistently work to improving or maintaining this aspect of your masculinity? Well, this is a super pertinent and powerful question. And so this leads into a discussion of our primal nature, which for me relates to our dark masculine, integrated dark masculine. So the dark masculine is the part of ourselves that's connected to our animal nature, our primal nature. If you think about animals that have been domesticated versus animals in the wild, the animals that are domesticated, they're obviously subservient, they're easily controllable. They can be beautiful and in different ways, obviously, but you don't fear them because they've been domesticated. Like a domesticated lion is very difficult, very different. It's, had its entire life raised in captivity. Is a very different animal compared to an animal that is absolutely wild. Now, there's leagues of difference. So the primal nature is a form of power that you unlock when you connect to what I call the killer aspect of self. You integrate the killer aspect, the primal aspect of self. So I do a process that helps to unlock that. But once you have it, you think in the wild, an animal in the wild doesn't have a master. It doesn't have an authority above it, other than its connection to the divine. Domestication requires you placing an authority above it, right? So whether it's the government, whether it's your wife or partner, you fall into the trap of domestication when you fall into the authority of someone else. So a core aspect of reclaiming your primal nature, your animal nature, is integrating killer, but also is placing authority inside of yourself. The moment you place authority outside of yourself, then you take power away from yourself to influence your own reality. So often when I'm working with people and coaching people that find themselves in victims and circumstance, one of the core things that I consistently see is that in some way they've placed an authority, a person, a situation, a scenario as being more powerful than them, which whether it's a person or an event or a scenario or an institution or an organization, they perceive that organization external to them has more power than them, which begins the domestication, which begins the loss of wilding, of wonder, of void, of possibility. Because when you're not told how to think, how to perform, you're in discovery. You're in the unknown. You're in the void. Almost perpetually. It's completely a connection with nature, and anything could happen every which way, every moment. When you're domesticated, your life starts to conform to very, very predictable patterns. You start to lose touch with your senses. You start to lose your creativity and wonder, and you start to become, I mentioned the word indoctrinated, but patterned to certain modes of behaviors that are conforming for your safety. Because you no longer provide for your own safety, you also eventually, through domestication, start to rely on that external reference to provide your safety because you don't have the power to do it yourself. So that's when people start to put the government in a position of safety over it. They start to put, religion or other things in a position of power and safety over them, of knowing better, of having better discretion and choices, which slowly erodes trust in self, which then adds to the cage that of the loss of your wildness. That's the cage of domestication. So the way to reclaim it is to reclaim your own authority, to connect with the killer, be willing to protect and keep yourself safe, and jump into the void. Stop placing power outside of yourself and start leaning into the unknown. So another part, so a core element of this, of course, is safety. If you believe that you've got the armor of God around you, if you believe that you don't need the government to keep you safe or some other organization to keep you safe, the onus of responsibility of your safety is within you. And then there's different ways you can do that. You can learn to develop a strong masculine frame, a penetrative frame, that killer energy. And it reminds me of the story when I went to the Amazon rainforest, the Dieta, and the tribe that was there, we didn't have any weapons on us, but we were surrounded by predators. And he said, it's very simple in the jungle. You decide whether you're the predator or the prey. He said, the predators know not to attack the predators because they could risk their life. But they could very easily perceive if you're a prey by the way you move. See, a predator moves through they're not expecting to get eaten by another animal, so they're focused on where the next prey is. They're observant and they're linear, and they're not looking over their shoulders. They'd be surprised if another predator was coming up because they're looking for what their prey is. Whereas the prey itself is constantly in fear, constantly wandering, and they often seek protection from others. Whereas the predator either protects itself and maybe its family, right? So when you start to connect, yes, when you start to connect to that primal killer nature, you start to assume the responsibility for your own safety. You stop placing authority outside of yourself, and you start to assume the role of protecting those that you love, like the alpha of a predator pack. If that's your responsibility and you want to be good at it, then that often requires that you elevate your potential to do so, which would mean you become a good fighter, you become physically dominant, you become physically strong, you become physically assertive, mentally assertive and aggressive, So in doing so, you start to become effective in your role. You start to become effective in your role. And you start to have that capacity to demonstrate your penetrative presence. So the primal nature also, as I mentioned, requires you to come back to an inner authority, which would mean that you have to stop placing power in things outside of yourself. So an example would be stop watching the news, stop reading newspapers, stop looking at controlled media, stop watching brain-numbing things on Netflix, stop getting indoctrinated in social media that tells you how to behave, or at least be very selective about what you expose yourself to that in any way seeks to have over you. That includes mentors or teachers. Good mentors and teachers will seek to elicit power in you, not have power over you. The distinction between cults and otherwise. So power is also expressed in not succumbing to fear. That's part of the primal nature, which I also discovered in the wild when I went walking in the wilderness, and I was scared because I was miles from anyone and by myself. And there's all sorts of animals, mountain lions, bears, and things around me. It's in the wilderness of USA. And what I realized is that I could tap into my killer nature, my primal nature, and immediately the fear would dissipate from my body. And I'm like, that's interesting. I can just put myself in a place of my primal killer nature and fear dissipates instantaneously. And then I could notice that I could just hold that place. I could put myself in the center and just be still. And then I started to associating knowledge that I could apply that to intensities of all sorts. Any place that I might feel fear, whether it's in relationships, in financially, physically, whatever it is, I could just connect to that primal nature. And then it's like the frequency of that stillness, of that presence, of that primal killer nature would just permeate every part of my body, the fear would dissipate, and I could just take action. Some people are debilitated by their environment and external references, which prevents them from being in their primal directive nature, right? So there's a hint. And obviously, healing your childhood wounds that that are triggers for you regressing into fear, uncertainty, doubt, overwhelm. Again, you heal those inner wounds, and that will help you further develop that primal nature, and also undoing any indoctrinations, as I mentioned before, by learning truth, falling into resonance and alignment with truth, and knowing how to stand for that truth, and choosing to stand and be a principled man who lives with virtues and stands for truth, such that when you feel deception from those trying to have control over you in any way, or manipulation, whether it's from governments or partners, you won't stand for it because you stand for your truth, and you feel safe in yourself that you're not willing to be manipulated to fall out of that truth and succumb to another person's will or exertion over you. So society and government, since we're going to get into discussions of this, the word government, govern, is to control. Ment is from the Latin origin of mind, to control the mind. So either you're controlling your mind or something external to you is controlling your mind. So if you allow indoctrinations, and a lot of the medical system, a lot of the legal system, a lot of the educational system, financial system, are designed to place you in a position of subservience and submission to a higher authority or power over you. And you become an extraordinary power the moment you reclaim your sovereignty. So the reclamation of sovereignty is a core element I've said before about reclaiming the polarity, because you know who you are and what you stand for. And you also, in your sovereignty, decide what's your highest good under God, so that you don't place external references above you. And so this helps you to deprogram yourself from these control programs and indoctrinations that otherwise have you trapped in being the submissive, subservient little tart that many simps and cucks become, right? Because then your strategy becomes as a conformist, because your safety then depends on how well you conform. Because once you're in the control system, to be safe, you need to be conforming. Otherwise, the system's against you. And so that's when it's kind of like the equivalent of now finding yourself in a cage, and you've got to now find a way to provide for yourself, hunt for your food, and then go out into the wild unknown, which a wild animal can do, but a domesticated animal might find a lot of trouble with. And that's the difference. When you can protect yourself, you can provide for yourself, you can hunt, you do all these sort of things, you start to become uncontrollable, because you won't be going against your truth, your word, your morals, your values, your virtues, nor will you succumb to indoctrination of programmings to external authorities. So you start to be someone who's not controllable. You get to be someone who's powerful. And it's something that you've got to be consistently vigilant towards. Because once you do, you have power, true internal reference power, true authority within yourself to create life on your terms, and you start to operate outside the systems of control that have you, that are attempting to keep you under their control and keep you weak, so as to extract from you your energy, your time, your attention, your money, your resources to serve their interests, to serve their system, as opposed to living in accordance to give your interests and your power and your progress in life. So a lot of the systems that are in place give you convenience, because being in the wild is not always the most convenient. It gives you convenience at the sacrifice of your energy, your time, your attention, and your freedom of information, freedom of movement, And so this is when your freedoms are taken away, that's how the indoctrination begins to happen, the cages, because it starts to create pain if you start to give up, if you start to try to take back those freedoms. If you look at often with the way the government does things, they'll create a scary thing that then takes away freedom and puts you in a smaller cage of operation. And in doing so, you start to become indoctrinated and compliant. They use pain, whether it's through, fines, police, taxing, whatever. And there's always around the system. When you're in a place of power, when you're above it, there's ways to, have structures in place that protect your assets, that protect your freedoms financially and other things as well. And freedom of movement, there's so many different things. But if you're not vigilant in protecting those freedoms, then they get taken away, and then you end up back into the cage of pain and indoctrinations that becomes even more difficult to try and take back, especially if you don't have that wild man integrated killer that's willing to endure pain or discomfort to take back his freedom. So I hope that's been useful. Did you have any questions, Scott?
Less of questions, but more so just a lot of reflection around how a lot of people, especially men, in many ways think that they have this mentality or this part of themselves that has, come online, or they think they're this or that, tough in this way or whatever. But a lot of people, again, especially men, will only show that in situations where they are comfortable, or in parts of their life where they feel they're comfortable, and they feel like they have the upper hand, they feel like they have the edge. And when it comes push to shove in those situations, like with law enforcement or the times when it really counts, it just completely falls apart,
Right.
because it's based on, like you said, that external frame of reference. And I feel like this whole sort of concept of being able to use that dark masculine, if you will, is kind of the ultimate manifestation of having an internal frame of reference, because nothing else external will matter if you don't have that ability to say, no, I'm not going to put up with this.
Right.
I'm not going to let this slide, no matter who it's from. And I wish I had written a lot more down during that.
So I've recorded this. So
there is so much that I could reflect on this, but I have seen what you're talking about more than I would like, and especially with the mess, 2020 to 2022, the people who have that and the people who don't,
yeah,
very much showed themselves.
right. And that's the reality. It's just like another aspect of frame. How strong you are in your primal nature is an aspect of frame. Because when things get uncomfortable, how quickly do you resort to seeking comfort? How much are you willing to endure the uncertainty, unknown of overreach of government, or institutions or otherwise, versus saying, look, I'm willing to engage in pain. I will not be shaken. I will stand for my truth. I will not be controlled, no matter what. Now, that comes at a risk, maybe to your freedom in the short term or something like that. But what we tended to happen, especially through that period of time, there's a lot of people that did things out of fear. And that even when those, say, freedoms were taken away illegally, right? When they actually went to fight to defend themselves in court, the cases were just thrown out of court. This happened continuously in Australia. There was government, overreach, tyranny, basically, and then people stood for some people who stood for their truth. It took them a year and a half, all these battles, and then they were acquitted from all charges because they were baseless and false in the first place. And the way that the laws were actually applied were illegal. They can't put in mandates. That's not law, as an example. So it's another part to maintaining your frame and maintaining, preventing indoctrination, is to know your laws, to know your rights, to know your freedoms, and then to stand by them. It's a super important component. If you don't realize that you're trading, your freedom for convenience or comfort, or compliance, for things that you don't realize you're agreeing to, there's so much we could talk about that. But let's put aside out the scope of what I want to talk about in terms of strawman and natural law and jurisdictions and all that sort of stuff.
That was another thing that came to my mind, is one of the reasons I feel many people, again, especially men, don't fully exercise that aspect of themselves, is because they lack that knowledge, whether it's knowledge of themselves or knowledge of the rules, if you will, or just how things are supposed to work, the things that are put in place in favor of them,
Right.
and they're just purposely kept ignorant because if someone knew,
Right.
hey, mandate isn't law,
Yes.
you don't have to do this.
Right.
They can ask you, they can
Yes.
politely beg you to,
Yeah.
they can do any of this stuff,
Yeah. But it's not
but
law.
it is in your, everything is literally set up in your favor. And
Right.
I don't remember where it is in the Bible, whether you abide by it or not, but there's a verse in there that refers to my people will be destroyed for a lack of wisdom.
Right. And it's true. And what's interesting is then if the people who step outside the jurisdiction to do something that's inappropriate, they risk their own penalty. You know, if they assault you, if they harm you in some way, they risk. Now, the truth is, the system does protect its own enforcers a lot more than it does the rights of the people. But it's still there is such a thing as going overreach. You know, and we see examples of that where they get a tap on the wrist. So it's the system is designed to support itself, not the people. That's basically it. So then once you realize that, then you stop placing your authority in something that's whose highest interest is not to take care of you, not to control and extract from you. Right? And when you really get that, then you're like, well, I choose to be living in accordance with the ways that elevate and uplift me, that empower me, that align me, that serve God, that serves the highest good of humanity, not the interests of that which would try to impoverish, enslave, diminish, disempower humanity. You become someone who cares for people more than you care for compliance. So anyway,
And
go for it.
I was going to say, I feel one of the other reasons, a big reason why they purposely keep people ignorant about the laws and the way things, not just with regard to, laws, police, sovereignty, all that stuff,
Right.
but, the whole concept of internal frame of reference to everything else in life is that once you have that reference and you realize what's working in your favor and you leverage those things in your favor using your internal frame of reference, if a person or institution decides to break their own rules, to go against what, outside of what they say should be done, someone who has that knowledge and is operating privately instead of publicly, when they violate their own codes, if you will, their own way of doing things, that person is much more likely to be willing to take drastic measures to correct things because they say, all right, I tried to do this your way. I tried to do this the right way. You're not playing ball. Now it's my turn. And they fear that because they know that if it doesn't take many people to spark that sense of, I don't want to say revolution, but that willingness to grow a spine, if you will.
Right. And I mean, it's all relevant. It's the whole 100 monkey effect. When you get a small group of people with full conviction and full alignment, full coherence, it spreads a rippling effect out to so many people. You know? So it's truth. Truth always will cut through any distortion, any delusion. So once you come into your own internal truth, you start to live in truth, you start to resonate with others in truth. Next thing you know, you've got this unified truth that becomes very powerful because it has the capacity to completely cut through and destroy any distortion or any illusion, which is really how they control the mind through distortions, illusions, manipulations that you won't stand for once you're in your power. So it's a very, very, I mean, on another note, when I came into my dark masculine, I became a lot more powerful, and including the way that I related to women in so many different capacities, right? So it's one of those things that the integration of dark masculine is a very necessary, in my belief, an essential part of reclaiming the power and starting to live in sovereignty and protecting that sovereignty so that you move through life creating this intention where you're the authority in your reality, not some external institution. So thank you so much for watching. We're going to stop the recording at that. Much appreciate you being here. Thanks for your input, Carl. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.